Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're going to be taking a deep dive into something I think you guys are going to find pretty interesting. It's human impacts on land resources. We've got a whole presentation here packed with info and some pretty powerful images. Really brings it home, how we're shaping the planet, literally. So you ready to dig in?
Let's do it.
Okay, so right off the bat, this deep dive kind of shows us that the problem is way bigger than just one thing. It's like overexploitation, pollution, land conversion. It's the whole shebang. But there was this one image that really stuck with me. It was a picture of this cracked, parched earth. And it just makes you realize, like, wow, we are really changing things up out there.
Yeah, for sure. It's a powerful reminder.
Hmm.
And speaking of powerful reminders, let's talk about deforestation. We all know that forests are vital, right? But did you know that they actually cover like a full 30% of the Earth's land surface?
That's a lot.
It's huge, and yet we're losing them at an alarming rate.
Yeah, that's right. And these slides really point out how it's not just about like cutting down trees for timber. It's a whole web of factors driving deforestation. Things like needing more land to grow food for a growing population, logging, building infrastructure, expanding urban areas. It's like this perfect storm.
Exactly. All that pressure leads to some pretty serious consequences. Things like soil erosion, disruptions to water cycles, and habitat destruction. It's not just losing trees, it's about unraveling entire ecosystems.
Right. And that loss of biodiversity, that really hit me hard. It's like we're pulling these threads out of the tapestry of life, and who knows what happens when the whole thing starts to unravel. And then there's the connection to agriculture, which gets even more complex. There's this one slide that shows a freshly planted field, but you can see these few lone trees, kind of like ghosts of the forest that used to be there. It's a stark reminder that agriculture, while it's totally essential for feeding us, is actually the biggest driver of deforestation. Which is kind of surprising to me. You'd think we'd get more efficient over time and need less land, not more.
Yeah, it's a good question. And the answer is pretty multifaceted. So yes, we absolutely need to feed a growing population. But our current agricultural practices a lot of times come at the expense of forests. For example, the demand for certain crops like soy, which is used for animal feed and processed foods, that drives large-scale deforestation. And in a lot of parts of the world, agricultural practices are still pretty inefficient. Land gets cleared for short-term gains without considering the long-term consequences.
Which leads to this cycle of deforestation and degradation.
So it's not just how much we're producing, it's how we're producing it. And speaking of harmful practices, the slides also talk about the impact of fertilizers and pesticides. There's this image of a skull and crossbones over a field, which really drives home the point that these chemicals aren't just about, targeting pests. Right. We often think about pesticides in a very targeted way, but their impact goes way beyond the intended pests. These chemicals, they contaminate the soil, they seep into water sources, and even drift into the air. And then there's the whole issue of pest resistance. Overuse of pesticides leads to pests evolving and becoming resistant, which requires even stronger and more toxic chemicals. It's like this vicious cycle that harms the environment and ultimately us.
Yeah, and it's not just the pests that are affected. The slides mention something called bioaccumulation, where these chemicals build up in the food chain and eventually reach us. That's pretty alarming. Makes you think twice about what you're eating. Speaking of alarming, this deep dive also covers desertification. And let me tell you, that image of a lone tree standing in this vast, barren landscape is haunting. It really makes you feel the impact of land degradation.
Desertification is a complex issue. It's happening in drylands all over the world. And essentially what happens is that the land loses its biological productivity, it becomes less fertile, less able to support plant and animal life. And what's scary is that desertification is driven by both climate change and human activities, things like overgrazing, deforestation, and unsustainable agriculture. They're all contributing to this growing problem.
Right, it's like we're squeezing the life out of the land, and the consequences are devastating. Loss of fertile land, food insecurity, displacement of people, these are all very real and very human impacts. And it's not just limited to like faraway places either. This is happening closer to home than we might think.
Yeah, that's true. We might not see vast deserts forming right outside our windows. But the processes that lead to desertification are at play in a lot of regions, even in seemingly lush environments. Take soil erosion, for example. It's a subtle process, but over time it can degrade the land and make it more vulnerable to desertification.
It's a reminder that everything is connected, and the choices we make, even seemingly small ones, can have these ripple effects across the landscape.
Absolutely. And speaking of ripple effects, let's talk about overexploitation. We often focus on pollution and degradation, but taking too much can be just as damaging. There's this one slide that shows these dying trees, victims of unsustainable logging. It makes you realize that we can't just keep taking without giving back.
Yeah, it's like constantly withdrawing from a bank account without ever making a deposit. Eventually, you're going to run dry. And we see this happening with overfishing, overhunting, overharvesting of resources. We're constantly demanding more than the earth can replenish.
Yeah, and it's not just about depleting resources. Overexploitation disrupts entire ecosystems. Think about overgrazing. Too many livestock in one area can decimate vegetation, leading to soil erosion and even desertification. It's a chain reaction that can have far-reaching consequences.
It is a bit overwhelming to think about, honestly. All this interconnectedness and the domino effect of our actions. But the deep dive doesn't just leave us in a state of doom and gloom, it offers some solutions as well. And some of them are pretty surprising.
That's right. We've talked about a lot of challenges, but there are reasons for hope. And one of the most unexpected solutions is responsible hunting. There's a slide that shows a picture of a deer in a forest. And it got me thinking, how can hunting be a good thing?
Yeah, it seems counterintuitive, right? But the deep dive explains that responsible hunting, when properly managed, can actually play a role in conservation.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance. Responsible hunting can help regulate wildlife populations, preventing overgrazing and disease outbreaks. It can even generate funding for conservation efforts through licensing fees and taxes. It's a reminder that our relationship with the land can be complex, and sometimes what seems harmful on the surface can actually be beneficial when done thoughtfully.
Yeah, it's like a delicate dance, finding that sweet spot where human needs and ecological integrity can coexist. And speaking of finding balance, the deep dive also talks about land reclamation, bringing damaged land back to life.
Land reclamation is a fascinating process. It involves removing pollutants, reshaping the land, and replanting vegetation. It's like giving the land a second chance. And it's not just about aesthetics, it's about restoring ecological function, improving soil and water quality, and creating valuable
So
habitats.
it's like hitting the reset button, right? And then there's bioremediation, which uses nature's own cleanup crew to tackle pollution.
Bioremediation is a powerful tool. It harnesses the power of living organisms, bacteria, fungi, even plants, to break down or absorb contaminants. It's a natural and sustainable way to clean up the messes we've made.
It's like having a team of microscopic superheroes working to detoxify the environment. It's incredible what nature can do when we give it a chance.
It really is. And it's a good reminder that solutions are out there. It's not about giving up. It's about finding innovative ways to heal the earth and live in harmony with it.
I love that. So what does this all mean? We've seen that human activities are impacting the land in some pretty significant ways, from deforestation and pollution to desertification and loss of biodiversity. But we've also seen that there's hope. Sustainable land management practices, land reclamation, and techniques like bioremediation. They offer real solutions.
Yeah, it's about understanding the interconnectedness of everything, recognizing that our actions have consequences, and then making choices that lead to a healthier planet. And that brings me to a question I want to leave you with. We've been diving deep into these impacts, but what are some specific examples of overexploitation happening in your own region? Might be closer to home than you think.
Yeah, that's a great point. We've been talking about these big global issues, but it's so easy to forget that they're also playing out right in our own backyards.
Exactly. And sometimes those local examples can be even more impactful because they're tangible. You can actually see the effects firsthand.
Totally, it makes it real. So thinking about overexploitation, specifically what comes to mind, for me, I immediately think about the salmon runs here in the Pacific Northwest. We hear all the time about declining salmon populations, and it's directly tied to overfishing habitat loss and even climate change.
That's a perfect example. Salmon are a keystone species in that ecosystem, meaning they play this crucial role in the health of the entire food web. So when their populations decline, it has this ripple effect on everything, from bears to birds to the health of the forests themselves.
Wow, it's amazing how it's all connected, isn't it? And it's not just about the fish themselves either. Overfishing also impacts the livelihoods of people who depend on those fish for their income and their cultural traditions.
Right, the human element is so important. Overexploitation isn't just an environmental issue, it's a social and economic issue as well. And speaking of the human element, another example that comes to mind is groundwater depletion. In many parts of the world, we're pumping groundwater faster than it can be replenished, which leads to falling water tables and even land subsidence.
It's like we're sucking the earth dry. And that has huge implications for agriculture, drinking water supplies, and the overall health of ecosystems.
Absolutely. And what's interesting is that groundwater depletion often goes unnoticed because it's happening underground out of sight. But the consequences are very real.
Yeah, it's a reminder that we need to pay attention to what's happening beneath the surface, not just what we can see. And thinking more broadly about our impact, one thing that really struck me in this deep dive was this concept of shifting baselines.
Oh, that's a fascinating one. Tell me about it.
Well, the idea is that each generation kind of accepts the environmental conditions they encounter as normal, even if those conditions have already been significantly altered. So we might not even realize how much we've lost because our baseline has shifted.
That's such a powerful concept. It really highlights how this gradual environmental degradation can go unnoticed until it's too late. We just adapt to the new normal,
Yeah.
and the memory of what was fades away.
Exactly. It's like the proverbial frog in boiling water.
Ah,
And it makes you wonder, what baselines are we shifting right now that future generations will look back on with dismay?
That's a really thought-provoking question, and it speaks to the importance of long-term thinking and intergenerational responsibility. We need to be mindful of the legacy we're leaving behind.
For sure. So where do we go from here? We've uncovered these complex problems, these interconnected challenges. What can we do about it?
Well, I think the first step is awareness. You've taken that step by diving deep into this topic, and that's crucial. The more we understand these issues, the better equipped we are to address them.
Knowledge is power, right? But awareness alone isn't enough. We need action. And that can feel kind of overwhelming. Where do we even begin?
Yeah, I hear you. It can feel daunting. But I think it's important to remember that even small actions can make a difference. And those small actions, when multiplied by millions of people,
Mm.
can create a ripple effect of positive change.
So what are some examples of those small actions? What can our listener do in their own life to make a positive impact?
Well, first and foremost, I think we can all be more conscious consumers. Think about where your food comes from, how it's produced. Support sustainable businesses and practices. Reduce your consumption of resources, especially those that are overexploited. Simple things like reducing water usage, eating less meat, choosing products with minimal packaging. It can all add up.
It's about voting with your dollar, right? Supporting businesses that align with your values.
Exactly. And beyond consumer choices, we can also advocate for change. Support policies that promote sustainable land management, responsible resource extraction, and conservation efforts. Get involved in local initiatives. Volunteer your time. Donate to organizations that are working to protect the environment.
So it's about using your voice and your actions to create a more sustainable future. And I think that's a great place to wrap up this deep dive. We've explored some challenging topics, but we've also uncovered some reasons for hope and pathways for action.
I agree. We've learned about the interconnectedness of everything, the importance of understanding our impact, and the power we have to make a difference.
And to our listener, we hope this deep dive has equipped you with knowledge, sparked your curiosity, and inspired you to take action. Remember, even small steps can lead to big changes.
And if you're feeling overwhelmed, just remember that you're not alone. There's this growing movement of people who are passionate about protecting our planet. So connect with others, share what you've learned, and work together to create a more sustainable future.
That's a beautiful thought. Together, we can make a difference. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, it really is about collective action, isn't it? Like one person making changes, it feels like a drop in the bucket. But when we all start making changes, it becomes a wave.
Exactly like that, saying, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has.
That's a great quote. And this deep dive has given us a lot to think about. We've gone from the big picture, looking at these global issues like deforestation and desertification, all the way down to our own backyards, thinking about local examples of overexploitation. And we've explored not just the problems, but the potential solutions too. It's easy to get caught up in all the doom and gloom, but there's so many people and organizations out there working on these innovative and inspiring solutions.
That's what gives me hope. It's not about being perfect. It's about progress. It's about, learning, adapting, and finding ways to live in greater harmony with the planet.
I think that's a great takeaway. And remember, this deep dive is just the beginning. It sparked a conversation, and now it's up to all of you to continue exploring, learning, and taking action.
So to our listener, we hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into the world of human impacts on land resources. We encourage you to keep digging, keep asking questions, and find ways to make a difference in your own corner of the world.
Because the future of our planet depends on it.
Thanks for joining us.